Hi everyone, Ashley here and welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. Today I'm sharing a super fun bubbly card that I made using a lot of the new Spring 2021 Lawn Fawn release items, with the main one being that beautiful bubble stencil that creates that gorgeous bubbly background. So I will explain all the products that I use and all of the techniques that go into this card as we go through. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'm starting with a piece of Strathmore Bristol Smooth cardstock, which is good for blending, and I've cut that to the size of a standard size card, so that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I just used a rectangle die with some stitching along the outer edges to do that. I placed the Lawn Fawn Grassy border die right on top there, and then I can use some green Distress Oxide ink. I'm using cracked pistachio to blend right over that to make that grassy bottom. I was originally going to use 2 colors of green there and blend them together, but after I had placed on the cracked pistachio, I realized that one was enough. I kind of just blended it out into the white, so I sort of like made it like a soft edge at the bottom, and that way it kind of became like a gradient on its own. Plus it was such a small space, it really didn't need 2 colors. So once I was done with that, I took the same stencil and I applied the positive space of the stencil over top so that it covered up that green blending I had done on the grass, and then I could blend in the sky. So for the sky, I started with some Tumbled glass Distress Oxide ink and just blended that right over that grassy stencil on the bottom there. And then I kind of am working my way up the panel, rotating that cloud stencil every time I go up one more iteration so that you get a different kind of cloudy pattern on each sort of stage. Once I got just past about halfway up, I switched to Faded Jeans Distress Oxide ink, which is just a slightly darker blue. As you can see, my cat is getting very involved in the process here. She loves to be part of the crafting process. Her name is Neenah. She's super sweet and cuddly, so I always love it when she joins me for crafting. So that is what the panel looks like when it's all blended, and as you can see, I just kind of finished it off with the Faded Jeans and kind of worked my way back just to make sure that that Tumbled glass and Faded Jeans blended together nicely, so you get that nice blend from light to dark about halfway up the panel. So once that was done, I put that aside and I focused on the images that I'm going to be including on this card. So I had gone ahead off camera and stamped out a bunch of these images using black ink. I use Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink these days. There are a number of different black inks that are good for Copic coloring. I've tried out a few of them. I really also like My Favorite Things Extreme Black ink. That one works well, but my stamp pad for that one was getting a little dry. So I switched over to Lawn Fawn Jet Black, which is also very good. So I'm just coloring these images with Copic markers right now. And basically what my general Copic coloring technique is to start with the dark shade and put that in areas where I think there should be really nice shadow. So areas that will be darker where there won't be as much light hitting it. I then blend that out with either a medium or a light, and then I blend out, if I used a medium, then I blend that out with a light. Sometimes I use just 2 shades, so sometimes I just use a dark and a light. Sometimes I use 3, so I use a dark, a medium, and a light. It really just depends on kind of the colors that I'm using, the size of the image, and kind of how I'm feeling, I guess. Smaller images, I tend to just use 2 colors, so a dark and a light. And for bigger images, I like to use 3 just to give a little bit more dimension and there's more space for blending. So on this picnic mat, I'm just using 2 shades of red for each of those alternating squares. I used a slightly darker red, I think I used R05, and then R02 as the slightly lighter red, and just blended them together for each of those squares. And then in the squares that were meant to be white, I just used a little bit of gray, I think a CO2 marker, just a light, cool gray, just to give a little bit of shadow and dimension to those white boxes. I'm just kind of continuing on with the coloring using the same technique for each thing where I just start with the dark and kind of blend out to the light. For the picnic basket, I colored with the darkest shade along those diagonal lines that are kind of etched in with the stamping. And then I blended those out with a medium shade. So the darkest one I used was E13, the medium was E11, and now I'm going on to E00 to just fill in those interior blanks. And that kind of just gives some nice dimension for the basket as if like those diagonal lines are kind of etched in, and that's why they're a little bit darker. For the rest of the basket, I'm just using the same shade, so E13, E11, and E00, and just kind of blending them all together in a way that I think should be blended, where the darkest color is where it should be more shadowed. Now I'm just continuing on with the rest of the images, so I'm going to color in all these little pieces of food, I'm going to color in the ants, and then I'm going to color in the bubbles. And so for all of these food images, I'm kind of just using the typical standard colors that you would expect these food to be. I'm not really going too crazy, trying to keep it fairly realistic. So coloring the sandwich in with some browns for the bun, and some green for the lettuce, and some yellow for the cheese. Then I'm going to be coloring in these ants with some grays, with using a darker gray as that darkest shade. So I think that's N5 I'm using as the darkest shade there, because of course ants should really be black, but I don't really like to color it with pure black as a Copic marker because I find like it doesn't really give much shading and dimension. So even if I want an image to be black, I usually just go for a very dark gray, and you kind of get the same effect. Like those ants look black, but really I didn't even use a black marker, I just used a dark grays. For the cheese, I'm just coloring it in yellow, and then I'm going to move on to those cans. And this is actually a good opportunity to talk about why I even made this card in the first place. So I wanted to make a thank you card for a family member who did something really nice, and that family member's favorite drink at this moment is some non-alcoholic beer that comes in these cans that are green and gray. So I wanted to make a card where these mice are drinking his favorite drink and the bubbles are kind of coming out of the drinks. So that's why on the final card you see the bubbles sort of emanating out from the drinks that the mice are drinking. That was kind of the idea behind the card. And I like to make cards that have these sort of personalized ideas behind them because I find that it's just nice for the recipient. I feel like the recipient always feels like, you've added an extra special touch just for them, which is always really nice. So for these bubbles, I just pulled out a bunch of pastel rainbow Copic markers, and I'm just coloring them in with each bubble having usually a blend of 2 of the different rainbow colors, trying to stick with colors that are beside each other on the rainbow as I blend in each bubble. So for example, like I'll blend red with orange or blue with green. Okay, so now it's time to blend on the bubbles onto the actual panel. And for this, I'm using the new bubble stencil from Lawn Fawn. This was part of their new Spring 2021 release, and this is my first time using it, so I'm super excited. So I'm just kind of using the stencil to place the bubbles where I want them to be, and then taping off around them to make sure I don't get any stray ink anywhere. And then again, I've brought out a bunch of pastel Distress Oxide colors in rainbow. So I have a pink, a pale orange, yellow, green, blue, and lavender. And I will list the exact names for those colors down in the description box below. So if you are interested in exactly which colors I'm using of Distress Oxide ink here, just go check out that description box down below and you will see exactly which colors are used. I listed them all out. Same goes for the names of the stamp sets for those images. So I do list out all of the images that I used, or all of the stamp sets that I used to get those images down in that description box below. So go check that out if you're interested. Okay, so I'm kind of going through the background and picking out which bubbles I want to be where from this stencil, and when I find a placement that I like, I'm just kind of sticking it down on top and taping around the edges so I don't get any stray ink, and then coming in with the Distress Oxide ink for that bubble. And as you can see, for each bubble, I'm using about 2 to 3 colors of Distress Oxide ink. I'm just picking them out randomly from the rainbow, and I'm trying, kind of like the bubbles that I colored with Copics, I'm trying to kind of keep them, I'm using colors that are beside each other in the rainbow. So if I'm blending, I'll blend yellow with either orange or green, depending on which way I want to go. I guess in this case, I'm blending it sort of with a turquoise. Or, purple, I'll blend with either pink or blue because those are the colors that are beside it in the rainbow. And I just find that when you do that, the colors blend a lot easier. If you try to pick colors that are sort of opposite on the rainbow, like green and pink or something, then they don't blend as nicely and they don't really produce like a nice intermediate color. So that is sort of the advice I would give if you are trying this technique as well. So there you go, that is what the pattern looks like at the end. I decided to just put a few bubbles scattered through the air. I didn't want to overdo it, and I liked that this way you kind of get that emphasis on those bubbles that are there. Okay, so I wanted the sentiment to be within one of the bubbles, and I'm using the new Spring 2021 release from Lawn Fawn. This is their Magic Messages stamp set, which is new. So this message says, "Thank you so much," and it's got some cute little flowers and things around it, which fit perfectly into this bubble circle shape. So I just thought that was really fun. So once that's stamped out in black ink, I can just glue this whole panel down onto a white card base. And once that is done, and I really hold it down to make sure it's properly glued, I can then start kind of arranging all of the images into place and gluing them down. So for some of the images, I'm using liquid glue, so I just put some liquid glue on that picnic basket. I put a few of the pieces of food in there as well. I put some liquid glue on this little picnic mat. And then for the little mice, I've glued the cans into their hands, and I'm going to just put a few little foam squares behind each mouse and lift them up a little bit. I like to give some images a little bit of dimension sometimes when I'm making scenes like this, just to give a little bit of interest. So not all of the images are completely flat against the card panel. You kind of get some that are flat and some that are lifted up, which I think is nice. So I've stuck those mice down, and now I'm just adding a few of these little extra images around. I had colored in a couple of those ants and a little piece of cheese, so I'm just gluing those down. And then I'll also stick a couple of the ants up on foam squares and put those down into the scene as well. And that'll complete sort of that bottom part of the card. So I really like that all of the images on this card are really focused down at the bottom, and then the whole top section of the card is completely reserved for those bubbles. And I like how much of a focus that is put on the bubbles in this card. I think this card is all about the bubbles, which, you know, that was a big part of the Spring 2021 release by Lawn Fawn, was all of these images and products that have to do with bubbles and mice blowing bubbles and words made out of bubbles and stencils with bubbles. So it's kind of fun to use these new products in a way that is really sort of interesting and different. So once I've got those last bubbles glued down, I can pretty much almost be done the card. I'm just going to put a few little gems scattered around the panel just to add sort of an extra touch of shimmer to the card. And after that, the card will be complete. So that is the final card. That is what it looks like. I really love, how, like I mentioned, how so much of the focus of this card is on those bubbles. And I love the rainbow blending of them. I just think that that's a really neat and colorful and fun touch. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that you get a chance to use these products at home as well. They're so much fun. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel. If you want to see more of my cards, definitely make sure to head over to my Instagram account as well. I share even more cards over there, and that is linked down in the description box below. Feel free to subscribe if you like my videos, as I do post them quite regularly as well. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!